So Paul, how does Hoshin Kanri help organizations?
So basically, Diana, Hoshin Kanri provides a way for organizations to take the two or three big things they're trying to achieve and systematically break them down into actionable priorities. I mean, the real challenge that organizations have is there's, in many cases, thousands of people who need to collaborate, work together to get the things done. But without such a process like Hoshin Kanri, there's no way to engage that organization, all those people, in understanding what the objectives of the organization are, how they personally are going to contribute to that, and then to be able to put a process in place that can follow along behind it and understand whether the things that we're doing, the various initiatives, have actually delivered the results we expect.
Now, do you think there's been more interest in Hoshin Kanri in recent years?
Absolutely. So if we look back, obviously in the first instance of people talking about Hoshin Kanri was in the late 60s. I think Bridgestone Tires was probably one of the first corporations to adopt it. But then we had a subsidiary of HP that basically picked it up and brought it to corporate America. And there were a number of organizations like Florida Power and Light and AT&T and Procter & Gamble, and more recently a very popular kind of example is Danaher. But those organizations have been doing it for maybe 10, 15 years. What we've seen in the last, I would say, 24 months is a massive surge in the use of Hoshin Kanri, a bit like the way Lean Six Sigma or Six Sigma potentially was picked up on the back of GE and Motorola and their deployment of that. And we're seeing it almost, across all industries and in many different service and manufacturing businesses as a kind of a way of building on what have historically been, I think for the last 5 years, companies building a level of maturity in lean. And then Hoshin, or the Toyota concept of Hoshin, has become something that organizations see as the next step to make what they're doing much more relevant and to ensure that all that improvement activity is lined up with the business objectives.
And why do you think we're seeing that uptick?
I think fundamentally, if we go back, I was lucky enough to attend the first ever PEX conference in what it was called in those days. I can't remember, but it's a first annual summit in the UK, and I think it was around about 2001. I've watched an evolution. Everybody in those days was talking about training and how to make, the process, the GE model, if you like, more effective. But over the last 4 or 5 years, it was obviously on the back of Lean Six Sigma, there was a big interest in doing process improvement, not just the DMAIC cycle, but how they could look at, looking at waste and flow and the whole lean concept. And I think it was the injection of that thinking and bringing across for that all of the ideas around, how you could link the plan, do, check, act concept behind lean to long-range strategic planning, which is the idea behind Hoshin. That's where I think the idea came in. And then people have started to discover, how the hell are we going to make all of our programs much more relevant? And how do we make sure that the senior leadership of the organization understand the process improvements we're making and can get behind them? And I think for that reason, Hoshin is becoming more and more popular.
So where do you see organizations often going wrong with Hoshin Kanri?
So we did a study on LinkedIn about maybe 6 months ago where we asked people what they saw to be the biggest barrier. And unsurprisingly, although there are lots of problems that people highlight with the administration overhead of the process or the effort involved in being able to actually implement the initiatives, fundamentally, the issue that people are challenged by are the management and behavioral mindsets and behaviors that undermine the Hoshin concept. Hoshin fundamentally demands a level of thinking, a kind of consensus-based thinking around what are our goals and can we create ways of closing the gap between where we are now and can we break that into a series of activities which can be realistically done. So some of the challenges that organizations encounter are, if you like, the stretch goal concept. There's a very strong prevalence to say, if I'm going to give you a goal, you're going to take that goal and put some spin on it and give it down the line, and eventually you're going to end up with a completely infeasible plan. That clearly undermines Hoshin. Another issue is the fact that we have this obsession with looking backwards, fault finding. Who did what went wrong? Who's to blame for that? When in fact, what we should really be doing is surfacing the information we know and looking to try and understand what's the reason behind the not tracking the plan, and what actions can we take. If you create a culture of fear, from following up and saying what went wrong, you're never going to get that to happen. So I think those things combined ultimately, and of course I'm going to say this as somebody who founded a software company that provides support for the Hoshin process, of course the heavy lifting can get in the way, managing and working with all those forms and spreadsheet proliferation, getting an infrastructure that can support that. And that's obviously what we specialize in, is also critical for being able to help companies succeed with the Hoshin process.
I think my final question is, do you have other recommendations on how organizations can really overcome some of those challenges?
Sure, I think several recommendations. I think the first one is that the Hoshin process talks a lot about the X matrix. People get fixated on the X matrix and bowling charts and stuff. I'm a big believer in the concept of the A3, which is the idea about working out for every objective, what analysis can we do to work out what's the art of the possible and what are we actually going to do. So creating clarity and focus through a catch-ball type process where what can be achieved and what resources can be allocated to that, and using the A3 as a vehicle for doing that, that's a really big part of the success story. Also, changing the focus of reviews, so you don't focus about what's happened, you shift your focus to, okay, where do we expect to be read on our plan? Not just where are we read today, but where do we expect to be read? And behind that, what's our plan? What's our countermeasures that we put in place? I mean, in mature organizations successful with Hoshin, they put a larger proportion of the energy and the time of the management team in understanding what they can do to support the getting back on plan than beating people up from being behind plan.